Thank you so much, Carlos, and everyone at Ong Inclusiva, and thank you all for being here. We're so excited to be with you all. My name is Shaylin Sluzalis.
Mi nombre es Germán Parodi.
And we are the co-executive directors of the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, also known as the Partnership. And we are the only national US-based disability-led organization focused solely on the rights and needs and inclusion of people with disabilities, older adults, and people with access and functional needs before, during, and after disasters. Essentially, we are, as Carlos mentioned, the boots and wheels on the ground response, community capacity builders, and disability rights experts before, during, and after disasters. A few facts as we get started today, and just echoing all of the remarks Marcy made as well. And thank you, Marcy, for your leadership, and Carlos as well. The United States, or I apologize, in the world, 15% of the world are living with are people with disabilities, and people with disabilities are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be injured than people without disabilities during disasters and emergencies. And largely this is due to the lack of resources, the lack of information in accessible formats, and reaching people that are most disproportionately impacted, as Marcy mentioned. In the United States, this means 1 in 4 people are disabled, which is 26% of the United States population. And as I mentioned, 15% of the world lives with a disability. We are always bringing folks together as disasters strike, as Carlos mentioned. We provide resources and information and referral services to people with disabilities impacted by disasters. And a large part of that is also bringing the community together to really prioritize, meet the needs of people with disabilities, and raise the ongoing issues that we face time and time again throughout disasters and emergencies. One way we do that is through our hotline, our disability and disaster hotline that Carlos mentioned as well. And right now we've been addressing many calls that are starting to come in from the recent tornado events that folks may have heard throughout the United States, impacting many states, at least 4 to 6 states in the United States, but Kentucky being the one most impacted this past weekend, with a tornado that took over 230 miles, which is 370 kilometers. Thank you. In Kentucky. And really hearing the needs of, as we hear each disaster, the lack of accessible sheltering, the lack of accessible information to reach shelters or disaster relief, humanitarian aid, and the need for prioritizing people with disabilities in the prevention, the planning, the response, and the recovery and mitigation throughout all phases of disasters and emergencies.
As we have all been living in the world with a disaster over the last 18, 20 months with COVID, we have been able to recognize globally that people with disabilities and older adults, specifically those needing assistance with access or functional needs, have been disproportionately impacted by this COVID disaster. If you're not familiar, as Shaylin was explaining earlier, people with disabilities are understood to die or be injured 2 to 4 times more than people without disabilities during these events. With the ongoing rise in extreme climate events, not only those that are slow moving like hurricanes, but such as the tornado that it happened just a few days ago, Saturday night into the early mornings, where people were asleep and woken to a disaster above them. To this point, we have been in touch, as we would do with what are called Centers for Independent Living, which are nonprofit organizations led by people with disabilities, focused on supporting people with disabilities in communities that they live. And they are already informing us that people with disabilities are not being collected in the data, something that often happens. And when our needs and we are not recognized in the supports that are needed, then we won't get the supports. Shaylin was explaining not only what can be seen, I'm a quadriplegic, I use a wheelchair, I need attendant care or personal care services to help me out of bed, help me get dressed and go about activities of daily living. And in a disaster, this is of a life or death importance. These are gaps that continue to go on, not only in these summer's hurricane disasters, but every single disaster we are seeing that people with disabilities are being excluded from the response. And as Marcy was explaining, if the response is not inclusive, if it continues having a shuttleable model, people with disabilities keep being, continue to be at the end of the response. This is a matter of life and death. COVID has given us all an opportunity, as disasters do, to create a better, more inclusive world. If we don't convince our communities, our politicians, our legislators that they need to include people with disabilities across all gamuts of development and policy, services, programs, and procedures, then we are not moving forward. We're in 2021, going into a new year where we have spaceships in Mars. Why can't we focus our needs on people here and make sure that we create a world that is inclusive of all? As Carlos and Marcy were beginning to talk about with the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration, or GADRA, we have been also supporting communities affected by disasters in the past year, and we are now in efforts to connect in donation supports to organizations in Haiti following the earthquake this past August, as well as we supported an organization in northern part of Colombia, in Norte de Santander, where they were able to support their communities with immediate needs following past summer disasters and hurricanes. And just now we were able to begin shipping a wheelchair for a young teenager who has never had a wheelchair herself. And this will change the ability for her and her family to survive oncoming certain disasters that if we and our systems are not prepared for, we are looking backwards and not forward. And this is what we need to do in this decade.
And lastly, just wanted to add, as climate is continuously increasing in intensity and frequency, the need to prioritize people with disabilities is vital. As organizations led by people with disabilities, we are first responders for people with disabilities. And one big piece we've learned throughout that is the lack of resources to these types of organizations led by people with disabilities, for people with disabilities, and responding to disasters and emergencies. And that is a large reason why the World Institute on Disability, Ong Inclusiva, and us at the partnership came together to create GADRA, the Global Alliance for Disaster Resource Acceleration, and really amplifying the need to support, but most importantly, fund these organizations doing this important, vital work, and continuing to expand that reach. So we encourage folks to join us and get involved within GADRA and reach out to us with more, especially as climate change is continuously increasing in intensity and in frequency. And we see that throughout each and every day. And just wanted to add one last piece as well in pieces of community resilience building. And as we do throughout disasters, bringing folks together, we at the partnership have been bringing folks across the nation in the U.S. together each and every day since February 28th of 2020 to share good and promising practices, systemic rising issues, and community-wide advocacy engagement related to the rights and needs of people with disabilities during this public health emergency, as well as touching upon concurrent disasters and bringing together not only the folks that are most impacted and certainly centering them, as Marcy said, but bringing in also the decision makers, the the folks that have some power to really make change, and bringing everyone together at one table to really dig deep into the issues and the priorities of people with disabilities throughout disasters and emergencies. And if you haven't started this type of practice, maybe it's not every day, as we have been meeting each and every day, weekends, holidays, birthdays, all of the days of the week, and continue to, but certainly bringing folks together on a regular basis and really coming together to identify what the needs are, and working to mitigate them and addressing people with disabilities rights throughout disasters. We really appreciate being with you all today and looking forward to more collaboration and further discussions. Always please reach out to us, and we'll be sure to make sure Carlos has our email to share throughout with folks, but that is directors@disasterstrategies.org. You can also find out more about us at disasterstrategies.org. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you all so much. And as sister organizations, know that we are always here in support and collaboration.